Has anyone here ever actually called into one of the FBI rewards for information on criminals and won the money? And what happened? Not safe for work. My neighbor down the road growing up was always getting into trouble. One day, someone robbed a gas station with a gun and accidentally shot the clerk, so he claimed, and the police didn't know who did it. After about a month, they offered up a small reward for information. The guy arranged to have his wife turn him in to collect the reward because she would need it since he knew he was going away for a long time. Don't remember the full details, but my mom called the cops on some guy who was featured on America's Most Wanted. Guy was on the run for several things, I think, but still took the time out to get his tag renewed at the DMV. 10 years ago, I'm working front desk at this third-rate motel, and I'm the only employee on property until 7 a.m. So I get this report of an unruly guest and check it out. Dude's whacked out on something, threatening other guests, and I call the cops to remove him. On their way out, they tell me he's got active warrants in another state. I don't think anything of it until 3 months later, I got a check sent to me at work from a sheriff's office 2 states over. Turns out, the guy was wanted for a double murder, and I got the reward when he was convicted. I felt pretty good about that. This is kind of related. When I was younger, there was a bad drought, and the lake I went to fish at was probably 10 feet below where it usually is, maybe more, and I went to go fishing under a bridge with my stepdad. I got bored, so I started playing in the rocks. I found an old pocket knife and a pistol. Turned the pistol into the local police department and got a medal back from them and a letter where it was used in a case to convict a murderer. I don't really remember the details. I was in 4th or 5th grade. My sister has a pretty weird hobby. She solves cold cases by helping match descriptions of bodies that have never been positively ID'd to missing persons matching the body's description. She solved several cases and submits them to the FBI tip line. Twice now, she's gotten phone calls from law enforcement as a result, one from the FBI and one from a local police department. One had reward money tied to it from long, long ago. She turned it down. Both times, she's informed the agency calling that the missing person disappeared before she was 10 years old. That's her limit. She doesn't look at recent cases to avoid potential problems, and they just kind of shrug and move on. That's all. Semi-related, I guess. I made an anonymous tip to a local library about someone posting online about wanting to do something sexual in the bathroom of the library. Local police and FBI gave me a call on the actual number, not the one I used to call in the tip, and asked me a few questions. Turns out, they set up a raid and caught some 19-year-old who was trying to meet a 10 to 11-year-old boy online. Got $500, and they offered to pay me to go on apps or websites like Craigslist and such to find the same kind of people. It was pretty cool. In college, we had a drive-by shooting on my block. The police showed up and asked all the neighbors if they had any information. I had just heard the shots from my house and wasn't able to help. A few days later, I was walking home from class and I found a shell casing in the grass near where the shooting was. I didn't want to touch it, so I got home and called the police. I was very, very specific about exactly where the shell casing was and that I do not want the police to come to my door. The neighbors were pretty sketchy people and I just didn't want to be seen being involved. Well, these fucking cops walked right to my front door and asked for me. I told them exactly where to find it again. They walked to the general area, looked for maybe a minute, then walked back to my front door and asked if I could show them where it was. God damn it. So I led them to shell casing while the sketchy neighbors stood on their porch and watched, looking very displeased. Apparently, the fingerprints on the casing matched one of their suspects and he was arrested and went to jail. The cops stopped by a few months later with a $20 gift card to a sub shop. I don't think we have such a reward system in Sweden, but in the mid-90s when I was younger, around 4 or 5, my father used to be a pro water skier. He and his friends used to train at the local lake and I was often with him there. One day, I was on the pier while my father and others were skiing when I saw the rainbow on the water by the pier. I told my dad about it, and he of course understood that it was not the rainbow, but petrol oil in the water. No one knew where it came from, so they started checking the boat for leaks but found none. After a while, someone noticed it was coming from under the water, a few meters from land. They ended up calling the police, who came there with divers. They found 2 cars, a few bags of jewelry, electronics, stereo, VHS player, stuff like that, golf clubs, bags of clothes, and parts of a body in one of the cars. Everything had been laying there for a long time. The VHS player was old, like one of the first models released. The cars were also old. The police thought it was things that had been stolen and dumped there. I did not get to see the body, obviously, but apparently it was not possible to identify who it was or why it was in one of the cars. The police took everything they found with them when they left. My father and his friends were asked a bunch of questions about if they knew who could have put the stuff there, but they had no idea since it had been put there in the 70s, long before they even started to train at that lake. I don't think they heard from the police again after that. The oil or petrol came from the cars. Rust had made it so something started to leak. Before the police left, one of the officers told me I would make a fine detective someday. I remember being super proud of that and telling all my friends about it, but they did not believe me. I called Crime Stoppers once. The local news released a video of someone violently robbing a store. They beat up the cashier pretty bad. I knew it the second the video started who it was, a guy I used to party with and had spent the night with a few times. The Crime Stopper folks gave me a number to write down to claim the money if he was convicted. I wrote it on my hand, then washed it off accidentally like an idiot. It was on the smaller side, I think around 1,000, but it would have made a big difference at the time. And the guy did up getting convicted and is still in prison now. I'm sure a bunch of people called in though, so I don't know how much I would have gotten. Anyone who grew up in my area who was around my age would have known that guy. My stepmom got a $25,000 FBI reward when she came across a girl who had been abducted and her whole family was murdered. The girl had been held in the cabin next door to my parents' cabin for about 3 months. The guy who did it left her alone for a couple of hours and she escaped, in the middle of winter in a very cold area. My stepmom was walking her dog in a pretty isolated area and the girl ran up to her. She was obviously very disoriented and traumatized, but stepmom helped her escape through the woods to a safe place and called the cops. There was a huge media circus and, although the reward money, $25,000 from the FBI and $25,000 from a local business, was awarded to my stepmom, she concluded that since the girl had technically rescued herself, it was appropriate for the money to go to her. Apparently there is some rule that you can't get FBI reward money in a case where you're either the victim or the perpetrator. So the money had to be accepted and then gifted back to the girl. In the end, the girl got the money and my stepmom got a big tax bill that year because reward money is taxable. She got to be interviewed on national TV by Gayle King though, and help save someone's life. So she's pretty okay with it. Long time ago, 20 plus years, a nearby bank was robbed at gunpoint. The article had a very good photo of the guy. Turns out, he was my sketchy neighbor. Saw him that morning, he was still wearing what was shown in the photo. Long story short, cops bust him. He goes away for a long hitch. They said a small reward is available. Told them to donate it to a nearby animal shelter. Everyone wins. Well, almost everyone. Well, my story isn't with the FBI, but it is about getting money for information about a criminal. My family used to own an internet cafe back in 2006. We used to use real names for usernames. We used to have a weekend deal for $20 you could have from 7 p.m. Friday night to 7 a.m. Saturday morning. Anyways, we had a cop come in around 2 a.m. Saturday morning asking if a Mr. Douchebag was here tonight. We look him up and yeah, he had bought a land pass plus a few hours. But he left around 11:30 or 12 a.m. The cop tells us he was wanted for assaulting a cop and if we see him again, to call dispatch. A month goes by and we get another visit from a detective who was asking about Mr. DB again. I was working the counter and said I didn't remember him, but let me look at the logs. I was surprised to see that he had come in a few days prior on that one day that week that I wasn't there and had used some banked time. The detective gives me his card and said there's a $100 reward for his arrest. 2 days after this, I'm working the counter again and a guy with a baseball cap pulled way down, sunglasses, backpack, and long sleeves comes in to add time to his account. This was the middle of July, so it already put me on alert. Sure enough, it's Mr. DB again, and he sat down to a computer and was checking email or something. I calmly picked up the cordless phone and walked to the back room. There was a little window where we could watch the whole store from and called the police line as quick as I could. Told the dispatcher that there was a guy who was wanted for assaulting a cop in my store. She said officers were being dispatched and I should stay on the line till they were there. I was amazed at the response time. They had officers walking into my store within 45 seconds of me calling the dispatcher. 4 officers calmly walked into the front and 2 entered in from the back door. Mr. DB was so engrossed with what he was doing, he didn't even notice them come in. They walk up to him and the officer in front puts his hand on his shoulder to get his attention and turns him around asking for identification. Mr. DB was sitting with the chair in the lowest setting and he slowly removed his hat and set it on the desk like he knew what was about to happen. He was outnumbered 6-1, and he decided that he was going to run. He got 2 steps before 4 officers were on him, bringing him down to the ground. They didn't even tackle him. It was more like they just guided him down into the wall and started trying to subdue him. He had to be on something because it took all 6 officers and being tased twice to cuff him. When I say tased twice, I mean the first taser ran out and they either had to reload it or use another one because they tased him for a good 60 seconds. He was let out and they took my statement. A few days later, the detective returned and gave me $100 cash. Honestly, the money didn't really mean much. It was cooler seeing their response time and tactics when it was about someone who assaulted one of their own. It really was kind of like a movie. We never cleaned the black scuff marks off the wall because it was a good story starter. TL, DR. I got $100 for turning in a guy who assaulted a cop and then got captured in my store a month later by 6 officers who responded within 45 seconds of calling the dispatcher. I met a guy who was in town from overseas while he had family in the local hospital on extended stay. Talked to him for quite a while. Was a nice guy. Fast forward a couple of weeks, someone with a very similar description was wanted for human trafficking. Same country of origin, same apartment complex that he was staying. Reported to Crime Stoppers, never heard anything. Could all be coincidental. Some might say too coincidental. I chased down a commercial truck hijacker. I saw him hijack a truck full of merchandise and cigarettes. He left the driver bloodied in the street, but he was otherwise okay. The hijacker didn't know much on how to drive a stick, so it gave me enough time to get to my car and try to follow him. I came across a police car cruising the neighborhood and flagged him down. I told them what happened, but they didn't seem to care. They turned in front of me in the direction I was headed as I continued to search for the truck. I suspected that it had turned down a side street. As we came towards a T in the road, the stolen truck turns in front of us, headed in the opposite direction. The cops move a little to the side to allow the truck to make its turn. I turned my car sideways to block the truck and laid on the horn. I could see the 2 cops look at each other like, WTF? They sat there wondering what the hell I was doing. So I got out and ran toward the truck, which spooked the hijacker. As he ran, I double-checked the truck to make sure it would not move anymore. I saw a fake gun on the floor and a pipe wrench. I took the pipe wrench and proceeded to chase the hijacker. When the cops saw me chasing the hijacker, they got out and also started chasing him. I couldn't catch up to him, so I threw the pipe wrench at him. I didn't expect it to hit him, but I nailed him right on the head, knocking him down. The cops caught up and arrested him. The hijacker had been wanted for 8 years' worth of commercial hijackings valued at over $5 million in merchandise. I testified against him in court, and he got 16 years in prison. The company that had been victim to his hijackings sent me a thank you letter. No reward from them or their insurance company. Not me, but my brother. My brother is a real estate agent in Puerto Vallarta, so he tends to see a lot of people. There was this guy that would frequently visit and own property in one of the big golf courses. My brother happened to be browsing the FBI Most Wanted and see in person that the FBI digitally rendered of what the person looked like now as he was over 80. And it was very similar to this person he would frequently see in the area. My brother got into contact with them and they asked for photos of the person and a little bit about who he was. My brother had to gather as much info of his schedule and the layout of the condos. So they made a plan and arrested him. If I'm correct, he traveled to Guadalajara and that's where he was arrested. This was about 8 years ago.